You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And you're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod's Vasily Grossman Life and Fate read-along, covering Part 1, Chapter 3. You can't see the faces Matt's making at me. We're covering Part 1, Chapter 3, continuing with Mostovskoy in the camps.
Don't laugh when you say that. It's not funny, Cameron.
You're the one that laughed. Matt, he could not stop giggling going into this episode. You just say gulag to him. He just breaks down and...
It took too many tries for you to get through that intro.
I think it's roughly the same one I ad lib every day, and yet I forget it every time. Anyway, so last episode we're talking about the new types of criminals the Reich has come up with, and now we're learning more about how the people have adapted, which is both somewhat, I mean, by the nature of the environment they're in, necessarily inhuman, but also kind of it reasserts its own humanity in a lot of ways. Anything you wanted to start off with this part with?
I 100% forgot about the first paragraph of this that I really wanted to dive into today. I'm going to go back and put it in our Discord now after. But you get the types of prisoners, but you also get how they're kind of divided in, I don't know if you'd call it hierarchy or what it is, but you get 4 names at the beginning of this chapter. And the only person who's let go is the non-military Russian woman who was sent on her way with some money and some bread.
Right. And this is in reference to when Mostovskoy and his party are captured, which happens in Stalingrad, captured by the Germans as they're being transported.
Yes, correct. And I guess maybe that's not clear based on how it sort of starts. But yeah, so that's what's happening. You get this one Russian woman who's non-military, and she's let go. It's not a big deal, apparently. And then you have Semyonov, who's just kind of common type soldier, and he's just sent to the normal prisoner, battalion wherever they're sending them to prison. And then you have Mostovskoy, who's in the a more specialized camp for political prisoners and for party members and people who are, presumably have some intelligence that they would like to get. But then you have Sophie Levinton, who is Jewish, and she is never heard from again. And so Grossman here is taking specific issue with how the Soviet Union kind of handled essentially the Holocaust after World War II in historical memory, and how this was tried to sort of not exactly be swept under the rug or pretend that it didn't happen, but sort of downplayed, I guess you'd say. In the sort of more official line being this, well, the Nazis were the enemies of the Soviet Union. They were coming after, all Soviet people equally. And, a lot of what Grossman's evidence that he collects points to is that, well, no, not really. It just happened that the Soviets were kind of in the way of what the Nazis were really trying to do, which was, of course, exterminate the Jews. And so this is why this is an important piece that I don't think it was mentioned much in our discussion today in our Discord, which is why I wanted to make sure that I noted this on the podcast now, because it's going to be a really important part of what we see going forward.
For sure, yeah. If you might have heard the term "do not divide the dead," that was sort of the rebuke to people who might have brought up that there were disproportionate numbers of certain ethnicities, Jews certainly foremost among them, but also other peoples more so on the kind of on the, I don't want to call them the borderlands, but in between, closer to the border of where the invasions happened. And you have to remember Grossman, as Matt was saying, was working on it was following these trends specifically because he was working on a work known as the Black Book, which is something that he and other Jewish journalists were working on, specifically documenting Nazi war crimes against Jewish people. Some of that work was used at Nuremberg, as Matt has mentioned previously. But the official publication of the book was basically kind of administratively run into the ground after the war. Although during the war, they did receive support for it. So you start to see this sort of, I think it would be too far to call it a denial, but definitely an official line where it's, no one group, suffered more than the others, which is certainly not the case.
Yeah, it's not like denial level, not like complete and total denial, right?
Mhm.
Just morphing of the facts more or less.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
so we have that today, and then we also have this sort of I don't know. To me, it's borderline comical in a lot of the way that it's written. Just the sort of humor that
Mm.
is present in this scene of Mustovskoye in the camp. And you wrote a little bit about that, and I was wondering if you'd expand.
Yeah, well, I mean, just right back to back in those paragraphs, you have um, but the quote from today is talking about the football teams that have eventually evolved and talking about these different areas of the camp which have formed their own teams, sick bay, the marsh team, the kitchen team, the poles. I guess the poles are their own department. Um, an department with not very good defense in their football team, apparently.
Hmm.
But immediately before that section, they're describing how in this barracks, it's life is difficult. You're a guinea pig. You may be called up by an orderly, and that person may be there to try to trade you some goods, or you may be called up by an orderly and you may disappear forever halfway through your conversation. And these two paragraphs exist side by side of this strange inhumanity, because at this point, the people, they are so dead to this possibility that happens just day to day. The only real reaction to someone disappearing is, oh, that's more space for me. Okay, cool. Let me try to get that. And then immediately going back to chatting about which of our groups are better at football. So just this, you see this, we've talked about this in our discussion. I think I've had other people mention it previously, the ways in which, individual humanity keeps asserting itself even in this environment, even if it's in a very, very morbid way. And even if it's like a false hopes, right? At the end of this chapter, which we have one of our readers mention actually, which I actually let me bring in their line here. I feel like there's a connection made between Mostovskoy's putting down of Catholicism and religion that's in reference to another comment we'll bring up later, as a good Marxist should. In the last line of chapter 3, these rumors were invariably both comforting and false, the opium of the camps. To offer the familiar and oft-quoted passage from Marx's work on Hegel, religion is the sight of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. So I see this as Grossman showing how human nature conflicts with ideology. We can consider ourselves above something like organized religion, but we all have our own opium, the thing that we need to make sense of our world and get us through its horrors. In this case, this is from Mike Shaw, who's on Instagram as Bookstapug. Mike is responding to another Discord user who we'll talk about in a second, who brought up Masovskoy's treatment of a Catholic priest. But more broadly here, we also have the people in the camps talking news in the outside world. They may be dead to the possibility, more so to speak, that they may be brought, to an unknown fate today, tomorrow, whenever. But also, did you hear the Allies might have a new super weapon? That there's this member of the Nazi high command who might be about to do, such and such thing. So this sort of kernel of, humanity still remains, even if it is possibly pointless, right? It will not necessarily reach them. I think that was what I was paying attention to.
I thought it was a good point. I mean, I think that people tend to um misread maybe that quote, the opium of the masses,
Hmm.
right? It tends to be something that's interpreted more commonly as something that is a deliberate tool used to oppress people.
Hmm.
And I don't think that was what the original intent is, and that's what not what Grossman is talking about here. Is talking about something that is can be almost useful in some ways,
Hmm.
even if it is false. It's a way that helps you kind of make sense of the situation that you're in a way that does not, make your mind just explode essentially
Hmm.
with the sort of a bitter reality that exists as such. It's something that allows you to kind of, I don't know, to say make sense of the world that you're in, but
Hmm.
it can make things bearable when things are really, really unbearable.
Right.
And so there, but I do also think there's this layer of sort of satire of Grossman kind of appropriating some of these phrases within this context as well, which I think is really remarkable to do.
Right. Yeah, and also to go back to that other Discord user, Leah, and I'll bring in their comment as well. As I've been reading Stalingrad and Life and Fate simultaneously, very ambitious there. I've been struck by that's my commentary, not Leia's. I've been struck by Grossman's ability to encapsulate webs of a complex emotion and the reactions of a diverse group of people to the situations in such short, perceptive bursts. The books are massive, but they're comprised of these compact, smooth sentences that are really stunning. In one of the introductions, can't remember which book it was in, Robert Chandler talks about how Grossman, as a journalist, trained himself to write in all situations. That really comes alive here, especially in the quote you've highlighted for this chapter, which you've heard. Skipping ahead to the juxtaposition of abject horror and everyday recreation builds a powerful image within this compact space. And then Leah also goes on to talk about that it interested them about Mostowsko's reaction to the Polish bishop who briefly travels with Mostowski. As Leah writes, as a Catholic, I found it morbidly funny, but I'm interested to see how Grossman examines religion and the interaction of religious groups in the novel, which is what Mike was responding to in the next comment. But also, I think that's something that's really interesting to pay attention to in this novel. If you listen to the rerun or the original run of the Sistine Madonna, you'll know that Matt and I kind of had some some discussion on religion and Grossman and the way that Grossman uses religiosity or religious themes, religious elements, language, however you want to call it, and which is interesting for someone who's not, by all accounts, himself religious. So I think interesting to pay attention to the ways he does integrate religious imagery and just the religion itself into the world of what he's writing about.
I can't remember where I heard this quote. It was something that I was watching for a class that I was taking on Life and Fate, and somebody referred to it as the greatest Christian novel ever written. And I'll just say it's really interesting that these viewpoints can exist, given the context of the book and Grossman himself.
Right. Right. So something to pay attention to. I think, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up, I think those are the two ones we wanted to highlight for today.
I'm good for now. There's so much, and that was a great segue into what we're going to talk about tomorrow, because we get a little bit more on religion tomorrow.
Yeah.
Shall we say?
Shall we say?
I shall.
You shall indeed hear from us. Well, thank you all for being here today, and you'll hear from us again tomorrow.